I want to introduce you to the Waterline Model. The Waterline Model helps us understand the highest leverage points in order to create change in a human system. So, if we were to start by thinking about a task in an organization, in a perfect world, right, we just get to cruise along and we're going to meet our goal with no problems. We all know that doesn't really happen in organizations, right? We're made up of people and people have challenges. There's lots of moving parts and dynamics. So what really happens, is we're cruising along, we're working on a task, and then we have a little problem. And what we call that is like dipping under the waterline model. So um, as we go along, right, we're going to have to dip and we're going to have to address some challenges, right? Then we might have to dip and address some other challenges. And it goes on and on like this until we're able to meet our goal. So up here, we're addressing the task. Down here, what we call this is addressing the process or the maintenance of the group and all these dynamics that are working, under the surface, essentially. Um, the highest leverage point, the best way to create change in an organization is to focus on structure. And this is really focusing on the roles and the goals. So goals and objectives, functional roles. I would also put in here, in many cases, there's an aspect of decision making in terms of, who gets to make the decision. I think vision, mission, values clarity really fits in this, right? Because it tells people how we agree to be together and which direction we're going. So that's really structure. Um, I've heard, I haven't seen the research on this, but, just kind of generally, people say, 95% of challenges in organizations actually are rooted in structural problems. Some people say the other 5% are pathological. So really we're saying like most of our challenges actually are rooted in structure. And so, rather than hopping all the way down here and really starting by, trying to just address conflict, for example, what we want to do is start looking at the ways that we can use structural solutions to mitigate conflict. So that's the first piece, right? We want to figure out ways, what are the aspects of the structural challenges? The next thing that we want to look at, and if we're considering how we can create change, we want to consider how we're addressing group dynamics and development. So this is ideas of inclusion. Do people feel like they belong? Do they feel like they, socially are part of the team? Influence. Are they feeling like they understand how they can appropriately influence in the system? Do they feel like they get a chance to influence? Is decision making clear? And do they understand when they get to be a part of decision making? And also, really importantly, how decisions are being made. Because if if we're not clear about that, everyone thinks that they get to be part of the decision or that they get to make the decision. Patterns of communication is really just about how are we helping people understand receiving the information that they need on a regular basis in a way that's predictable for them, so they know when and how they'll be getting information, and also really being clear about what information is important to us in this organization. If we're not clear about what our metrics are, what we're aiming for, what kind of information we want to share and to be important, then it's really easy to kind of end up in the weeds where people are spending a lot of time and attention, talking about, thinking about, worrying about things that are actually not that important to the organization. For example, weird social dynamics, gossiping, that kind of stuff. And then interdependence is talking about how do we work together. And a lot of this can be really rooted in creating really clear operating agreements about what are our norms about how we do communication. How do we want to deal with challenges that come up in our team, and even some of those things are even structural, like what channels do we use for certain types of confirmation or communication? Where can we expect to receive that from? So this other piece, and I think when we have a sense that there's some conflict or some challenges in our organization already, we tend to want to start in this area. But really, it's further down in terms of leverage points, because we can really get stuck in the, this interpersonal grip. But really, the root of this conflict is often coming from these things up here, that we haven't addressed or identified. So, also really important though, and because these things have typically already happened, we have some of this and we do have to address it in some way. So it's not like you get to ignore the interpersonal aspects of challenges or change. It's just that it's not the highest leverage point to start with in terms of solving challenges. So, this is really about how do we agree to communicate with one another? How do we give feedback, and at what frequency are we giving feedback? Feedback is one of the best ways to build trust, and so we really need to have a way to be giving feedback regularly, in a way that's predictable. And then, of course, how do we deal with conflict in our organization? So, between two people. And how do we, at some point, resolve conflict if there's something, agree to disagree, or there are times where, we ask people to, even if they disagree, to eventually commit. And if we have situations where that isn't happening, how do we address that in our organization? And then this last piece, which is still, of course, really important, but again, it's not one of the highest leverage points in terms of creating, system health and system change in the organization, but we do often have to address it because, again, we have these other challenges. So interpersonal, that's what's happening within an individual. This is about our own individual internal experience. It's about the beliefs and values, assumptions that we have that drive our behavior. A lot of conflict can come because someone really believes that something, quote, should have been done a certain way based on their own worldview. And sometimes someone else has seen that differently, Often things that make us really angry are things that are trumping a value that's really important to us, that someone else may see differently. So we do make a lot of assumptions about how things should be, rather than addressing that with someone directly. So being really clear, again, even about values in the organizations can help people understand how their own values might be butting up against that, or how the team is able to work together to really have a shared sense of values. And, even an example about how interpersonal stuff shows up, right? If we don't feel like we're included, we're such social creatures. Our brains are still pretty primal in a lot of ways, and we're very dialed into social dynamics. If we don't feel included, we're going to be having an internal experience that's going to make it very, very hard for us to be effective, right? We're going to be kind of always a little bit activated and insecure and defensive. So I think the waterline is so important in just thinking about how can we leverage our time, our efforts to make the best change in the organization in the shortest amount of time, without, getting mired down in, conversations about feelings and, all of these things that we tend to want to get sucked into, right? Because we want people to feel really happy and effective and engaged in our organizations. But often the way to do that is to focus on creating really great process and structure, and to be getting great business results. So that's what helps people feel happy and engaged. So I hope this is helpful. Again, this is the Waterline model, and I'd be happy to chat about it more.